in change, facing big external threats in which you have no input or control over, similar to what you guys are facing with COVID. I'm hoping that my experience and what I learned through those changes would be of value to you today. So I'll explain a little bit more later, but my name is Sarah O'Hay, and my previous role to now was a Global Director of Learning. Thank you.
Sarah, thanks for that. And in true, working online and delivering training online style, I can't get my slides to open, but they'll open in a while, and there's absolutely no rush in that anyway. We're not going to worry about it. Just in terms of today, as we said, we actually really want you to enjoy the experience of coming to the session. It is called Right Here, Right Now. And just going back to, for any of us that might remember Fat Boy Slim's song, Right Here, Right Now, it is about that. It is about trying to stay in the present moment as much as we can. And essentially, I'll just see if the slides will come up for me here now. But in terms of what our wisdom, what we're saying is that we can choose how we relate to our experience. So we don't have a huge amount of control at the moment, but we can choose how we actually relate to that experience. So we can't change the experience necessarily, the reality of how difficult it can be, but we can choose how we relate to it. And we'll talk to you more about what that looks like. And our approach is very much coming from a mindfulness perspective, very informed from, mindfulness in terms of how it can be very practical, not the commercial aspect of mindfulness that we see so trotted out there now. Spend your 10,000 euro to be more mindful. It's not about that. It's about how can we practice mindfulness in a very real way, in a very present way, and what actually works for us. Okay, so just in terms of today's session as well, we want to share practical advice with you, as we said, in terms of what we find works from a practical point of view. And we think at the very, very least, from coming to a session like this, it is a rest from your day. It's an excuse to stop, that you actually get the opportunity to come and to attend and to sit down or stand up, but certainly that you're not being, that you do have the opportunity to listen to this, and that at that point in time, at the very least, you're not being pulled in what might feel like 100 different directions. And we do have an intention for you as well that you would thrive and not survive. So going from survival mode to hopefully thriving, but in a different way, in a way that isn't laden down with lots of expectations, because we know from our own experience that our expectations of what we want to happen can very often be a barrier to, and it can get in our way, our actual expectations of life, of ourselves, of others, of scenarios, etc. When most of the time anyway, we don't have as much control as we think anyway. It's very perceptual in terms of how that is. So in terms of arriving today, and what I wanted to say as well is that if anybody wants to put a question through the chat at any point in time, you're very welcome to do that, and we can take questions at the end as well. But certainly your questions are welcome to chat, okay? So you're arriving today, give yourself a chance to arrive right here, right now, as we say. So being seated, or standing, feeling your feet on the ground, getting comfortable in whatever's supporting you, if it's a chair, if it's a stool, whatever it is, the corner of a couch, whatever that might be, one of your kids' seats at home, depending on where you're logging in from, okay? So you could be actually in your business, but you might be at home, you might be in your car. I've taken a lot of these calls in my car recently, and the car can be a handy office as well. And just being comfortable, okay? So Sarah and I will talk to you more about what we actually bring in terms of today. We're going to share some practical examples. And one of the things we want to invite you to do right now is to start paying attention to your breath. So here, as we are here right now, on the 22nd of October, 2020, can you just take a second now to notice your breathing? So all we are doing now is just paying attention to our breathing. That's all. Come straight into the present moment. So not worrying about if it's too fast, if it's too slow, if we don't know what it is, but just notice it. Thankfully, from a physiological point of view, we don't have to worry about breathing. We just automatically do it. But through all the great research that has happened on the brain in the last 10 to 20 years has been exponential. And what we know from neuroscience research is that by just paying attention to your breathing, your actual brain starts to calm down by just noticing your breathing. So something as simple as that, Sesame Street simple. That's all it is. And there's another thing I just wanted to share with you as well, and it is something a bit different. But if I just do this, for example, and how long did that feel like? And it can feel very, very long. That was only a very short space of time. But what these are, they're called Tibetan singing bowls. And for anybody that practices mindfulness or meditation or interested in sound for lots of different reasons, you might have come across them before and you might not have. These are called Tibetan singing bowls. And essentially how they work is that the resonance and the sound that comes from them directly accesses the middle ear bones in our brain, or sorry, in our skull, and that sends a relaxation message to our brain. So something as simple as that. And I just wanted to share that with you. It's a very, very easy thing to do, only for a couple of seconds. And we know again through neuroscience that it does take the brain 45 seconds to register an experience. Now that sounds like a short space of time, but believe me, as somebody who can be a very fast person, 45 seconds is longer than you think. I wear a digital watch, and what I think is 45 seconds versus what it actually is are two different things, because we're a lot faster than we realize. And obviously that's wonderful in an industry like this, because you have to be very responsive and you have to be very, very quick. But if you're doing something like this to support yourself, you want to get the full benefit of it. So really taking that 45 seconds to pay attention to your breath, to listen to something like that, whatever that relaxes you, just make sure that you give yourself the gift of enough time to get the full benefit of that. And as I said already, something as simple as paying attention to your own breathing that's naturally happening anyway will start to relax your brain and you become more present. And we usually get on a lot better in our days when we are more present. So we're going to be talking in a while in terms of, Sarah's going to talk about her leadership experience, and she's going to share some very practical, experiences of what has worked for her and what didn't work for her. From that point of view, in terms of her lived experience as a leader. And I know there's lots of leaders on the call today. We are going to be looking at it from a leadership point of view, obviously in terms of you as a leader, but also in terms of your own well-being. And what we would ask you to think about is this whole concept that we've all had a different story so far in life. So before today, so before the 22nd of October 2020, all of us have had a different path in life so far. Some of us, so it can be different things. And we could think of that kind of generally, maybe into 3 different categories. So some of us, things have kind of generally worked out for us, more often than not, things have kind of worked out, some good times, some bad times, but more good than bad. And maybe it's 41% is good enough, right? So we kind of say, look, life generally works out for me. And that's great if that's your story. Other people might have had a very difficult background. They might have had an awful childhood. They might have been bullied in school. They might have been in a negative relationship. They might have been bullied at work. Who knows? And again, life has been very, very hard for them, and they find the world hard. And critically, they find it hard to trust the world. Okay, and we'll talk about that again, and what that means as a leader. And then you have the other side where you've got people who've had a fantastic time. It's all been brilliant. They were spoiled rotten, as we say in Cork. Everything was great. Work was brilliant. College was brilliant. Boyfriends, girlfriends, the whole lot was fantastic. Okay, brilliant. But they mightn't be as high in resilience then, and their kind of coping ability has never really been challenged that much. So that mightn't be necessarily great as well. And we know, like psychologists tell us all the time, that essentially our strength can be our weakness and our weakness can be our strength as well. So we generally have those kind of 3 different types of people, and some in the middle. So the person who things kind of generally work out for, the person who's had an awful time, and the person who's had a brilliant time but mightn't be as resilient. And who knows, right? And there's individual differences as well, and of course there are. But this is very, very relevant. And this is very relevant in terms of thinking about you. So what has your story been in life so far? Have things generally been okay for you? Can you generally trust people? Do things generally work out? And that might mean then that you're kind of comfortable in your own skin. You're happy with enough information to kind of get on with things and to see how things work out. And that's wonderful if that is the case for you as a leader, because you're going to trust people. You know, you're not going to need to have all the information all the time, very large controlling tendencies, etc. But then again, if you've had a difficult time so far, you might find it hard to trust yourself, to trust others, and that can come across in our behaviors then as well. So there's all sorts of things happen, you know, in terms of us, in terms of how we behave every day as leaders, in terms of our teams, in terms of how we work with our team, in terms of how we respond to our team, the messages we give off, the messages that our team give to us, the messages that we think our team are giving us as well. So a lot of it's perception. We can adapt as well. We can make all these adaptations. I mean, we are going to be talking more about this today. You are in the hospitality industry. You are in the business of fixing problems, fixing solutions, you know, making sure you're of service to others. That's all wonderful. But right now at the moment, there's lots of things we can't fix. And it's a different experience as well. So we'll talk about that too. So what I'll do now is I'll hand you over to Sarah. She's going to talk to you about her experience as a leader. And her key wisdom really is, you know, thinking about the story that people are different and that we can be different, and different people need different things, and there's different things happening all at the same time. And her key wisdom is very much anchored in, you know, managing each person as they need to be managed, not as how we think they need to be managed. So I'll hand you over to Sarah now, and she's going to share some of her experience with us.
Great, thank you, Avril. So, as I said just earlier, so for 10 years, I have been leading and managing through change, albeit for a very different industry from you guys. But I had a kind of similar, not the same, but similar experience back in 2010 with an organization I was working for near Brandon, a pharmaceutical site, formerly Shearing Plough. And in 2010, shortly after I became a new leader, actually, Merck, or MSD as they're known in Europe, took over our plants. And they came in with a very stark message: you either become competitive within 2 years or we shut you down. And as a leadership team, it felt very, very unexpected. Maybe it should have been expected, but it was very unexpected, and it sent a shock. And also, you know, there's a recognition that for a pharmaceutical site in a country place in West Cork, it was a massive local employer, and all of the indirect work that comes from that. So as a leadership team, we felt we had this huge responsibility to keep business in Bandon. But part of the threat, if you like, because it was an external threat, we had no control over the timelines, we had no control over the targets that were being set for us, and we had no guarantee that even if we drove a lot of this change, that we would still be kept within the Merck network. So just to give you a bit of background as to who MSD or Merck are, so they're a huge pharmaceutical organization, 65,000 employees worldwide. They're mainly a vaccine business, and they are one of the 9 companies right now in the race to deliver the first COVID-19 vaccine. Merck has been around for 125 years. They have 4 sites here in Ireland, so a long tradition and history here in Ireland, in other parts of the country. They came up with the chickenpox vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, that MMR vaccine. Merck were the first to, you know, discover and produce that. They also do shingles, hepatitis A and B, and then the HPV vaccine that you know, teenagers now get in secondary school, as well as some prescription products that you might be familiar with. So Noxafil, Nasonex, which is an asthma over the prescription product, Gardasil, Claritin, an antihistamine, I think a lot of people are familiar with. So a massive organization with a huge global footprint, but very competitive in their attitude and in the way they do business. And ultimately, in that world, if you were not generating revenue, so you're not part of the sales organization, you are actually considered a cost. So in order to be a part of that business, you have to be very cost efficient. So as a leadership team, we had to ask ourselves, you know, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? What capabilities do we need? who do we bring in to help us? What kind of, what roles are we going to have to let go of? How are we going to cross-train people? I mean, ultimately, we had to move from a site of 1,200 employees down to 275 employees. I'm getting an echo in a 2-year period. Okay, I was fine. The echo's gone. And so massive change in a very short space of time with, as I said, no guarantees of success. So a key question we ask ourselves is, we need support. How can we get support here, external support, to support the leadership team and the employees through this really hard time? And that's how I met Avril. So Avril came with another organization called Motivate, set up by sports psychologist Enda McNulty. You may have heard with him. He has worked with the Irish rugby team and Leinster Rugby. And they were an organization to help our performance and to help us stay buoyant and energetic and present to what we were doing so that it wouldn't feel as hard. And also to keep the leaders supported and nourished through that time, and the employees. So we had a brilliant program of events like archery at lunchtime or table tennis at 4 o'clock. But, times during the course of the day that people could take their mind off what was really going on and have those kind of moments of joy and positivity, and to take the weight out of everything. So as a leader, at the time, I was new to leadership. I had a big team. We had to make a lot of hard changes. And I was a single mom with a small girl who needed a lot of learning support and medical support. So I was lucky enough to meet my first coach, Avril, who I leaned on really heavily. And one of the key learnings that she shared with me back then that has sustained me over the last 10 years as a leader, and now sustaining me in the new iteration of Sarah O'Hay, is really paying attention to my breath and my body, and really giving myself that time over the course of the busy, busy day to just connect back into myself and my body and my breath, and come back to right here, right now. So really pulling the mind from the future, from the worst case, from the next conversation, the next task, the next potential disaster, and back to right now, where I am now. And I found over time that on the days that I actually took that upfront time, maybe before I left the house, maybe when I reached my office, potentially 2 or 3 times between meetings, and again at the end of the day. On the days where I took that upfront time, I felt better in myself. The quality of my conversations were better. The quality of the decisions were better. And the quality of the tasks that I was doing was better. They weren't perfect. They weren't always brilliant, but definitely they were better. And I was getting better outcomes on those days. On the days where I felt I didn't have enough time, where I didn't want to invest that time, and I was feeling under huge pressure, on those days when I didn't attend to my own needs to be in the present or to be in my body, in my breath, the days were harder. The quality of the conversations were poorer. The decisions weren't great either. And quite often the tasks had to be repeated. So I started to notice that if I allowed myself not do that action, I would have to revisit decisions. I would have to go and repeat a conversation. I would have to revisit a task. So ultimately, the time was spent anyway. I was nearly putting my investment of time in the wrong place. So it was really, for me, I either pay now or pay later. So over the course of those 2, which became kind of 3 years, I really got good at taking that upfront time. Even on the days when spending 2 minutes listening to my breath, with every part of my being screaming to move on. But if I did it, I really, really got better. I was better able to support my team who needed, to be supported, who potentially needed to be cheered up or needed to be talked down off the ledge. I myself was better able to be present to each person I met that day. And I could meet them where they were at. And I could have that difficult conversation. I could have that connection with them that would allow both of us come out of that conversation better. And it was the same when things got really rocky and we'd have to have a leadership team meeting. If I really settled myself before I went into that room, the quality of the meeting was better for myself. I had a great leader who used to say to us, don't look down, keep looking up, keep seeing hope. The minute you go into that overthinking, worst case scenario, stressy brain, he would say, when you do that, you're looking down, you're bringing yourself down. So pull yourself out of there, get back in touch with your breath, with the right here, the right now, and that will allow you look up. And I took that really to heart, because what I noticed was also, apart from having better quality conversations, the quality of my thinking got better. We noticed that when we gave ourselves that pause and that time, your consciousness or your mind can expand, and you can expand your thinking. And you will find that if you can do that, even in times of great crisis, you will have better ideas. In fact, you'll probably innovate in a way that you may not ever innovate during peacetime, because you're just in the treadmill of the day to day. So a lot of things can get better if you can really just get to that place of right here, right now. This is the only moment that matters. And now I'm ready for the next moment, rather than running from one to the other, or, which we've all done, you're having a conversation with someone and you're actually thinking about the conversation in 2 hours' time, which means the one you're having isn't great. And definitely the one in 2 hours' time isn't great, because then you'll probably be reflecting on the one you made a bags of earlier. So from a leadership perspective, if you can really give yourself those moments of pause, come back into your breath, come back into your body, focus on being right here, right now, you will actually reap huge rewards. So thank you, Avril.
Thanks, Sarah, thank you for that. So as I said, our approach is very anchored in very practical mindfulness, and mindfulness comes from Buddhism. You might be aware, but it's not Buddhist, let's say, because the Buddhists don't believe in kind of having explicit categories, but the wisdom comes from that. And the person who really integrated mindfulness into mainstream medicine initially, is where it kind of came into our society from a formal perspective, is a guy called Jon Kabat-Zinn. So Jon, Jon, Kabat-Zinn, is from the US, and he was working with these patients, I think it was in the 70s, with chronic anxiety, chronic depression, chronic addictions, and typical medical approaches weren't working. So he was interested in the Eastern philosophies himself. So he did a lot of work in bringing mindfulness into mainstream medicine. How he did it was he developed a self-education program for patients to learn themselves and to be guided around how to learn mindfulness in a very practical way. He developed two key programs. The first one he developed is called MBSR, and that stands for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And the other one is MBCT, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. But critically, without worrying about their titles, the most important thing is that they had an impact that the traditional medical approaches didn't have. So it was training people on learning about their physiology, learning about the mind and the brain, and at a very basic level, the mind-brain connection, and what to watch out for in terms of things that can trip you up during a day, and that when you do trip up, how to help yourself in a very, very basic way, but in a very effective way. So he did a huge amount of work, and then obviously it spread across the world through the ways that it does that. And I'll talk to you later on in terms of my own training in mindfulness. And I was basically, as I said in the earlier session today, I was told explicitly, you need to go and practice mindfulness, because I was working in a very, very busy environment, but I was busier than the environment. I was addicted to the busyness. I had all the signs of it, you know, covered in skin conditions and everything, but I had my fantastic BlackBerry, so my ego was very, very happy about that. But I was working around the clock, and I certainly wasn't being mindful. And I was told about mindfulness. And when I was first explained what it was, I absolutely thought the person was, I probably thought they were stupid. I was like, how is that so, like, that's obvious, you know, being present. Of course I'm present. And I wasn't present at all. You know, focus on your breathing. Sure, I do that. And I wasn't doing that. I definitely wasn't doing it. And it really is a very simple practice, but it's not easy either, because, you know, we are trained and we're raised and we're habituated, as we say, in a very, very different way in the West. I mean, we're rewarded for doing, we're rewarded for achieving, we're rewarded for fixing problems. We're not necessarily rewarded for just being and for just being present. It's not really, you know, part of our culture at the moment. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, that critical piece of being aware of ourselves in terms of our story in life and how that impacts us now and how we're doing right now. You know, are we kind of generally hopeful about COVID, or are we doomsday? You know, what's going on for us? And then being aware of that then in terms of our teams, you know, from that perspective, and, you know, essentially, you know, our levels of trust, because it's all about, do you trust? Do you feel safe? Do you feel safe enough? And enough is a critical word here, because I'm trained in lots of the different, what we would call psychometric tools, so personality profiling, etc. And when we try and get a handle on people, you know, in terms of how they relate, if they believe in relationships, and if they'll open up in relationships, and if they'll work in relationship, because a lot of people say they will, but they actually don't, because they don't trust other people. And the question we ask from a Gallup perspective in terms of trying to understand that in terms of the person is, this is the question: do you trust people until they prove you can't, or do people have to earn your trust first? So I repeat that question: do you trust people until they prove you can't, or do people have to earn your trust first? And I would say in my own case, I was the latter for most of my life. You know, no, you have to earn your trust. You have to show me you can do it, and then I might trust you. But now I'm really opening up to this in terms of the power of real relationships with people, you know, really being there for yourself. And, you know, and as a result, being very genuine with the teams you work with, and people pick up on that, and they love that. They love that authenticity. So as I said, you know, the entire show is your story, your team member story, understanding the who, you know, who's part of your team, why are they there, what do they need, you know, as we said earlier, managing everybody as they need to be managed, you know, and that's a critical piece, and it's not an easy thing to do. How can you help yourself around that? It's just by simply trying to be in the present as much as you can. The more you do that, the more you'll naturally resource yourself. Today is not about us giving you your top 30 tips for surviving COVID. It's not about that. It's about reminding you, because intuitively you already know this, but it's about reminding you in a structured way that you have this ability. You have this ability. We're different to other mammals. We know that we think, and we know that we've got body sensations and all this kind of thing. Other mammals don't. So what can help you the most? Awareness is the key. What is awareness? Awareness is just being aware, as it says in the tin, aware that we have a few different aspects to our experience happening at the same time. So we just don't think and nothing else goes on. Usually we're thinking something mentally. So there's some sort of mental activity going on, whether it be conscious or unconscious. Okay, so that's a whole different conversation, the unconscious, but we usually have something going on mentally. There'll be some sort of representation in our body. There's going to be a physical sensation somewhere in your body most of the time. Like right now, you can probably feel your feet in the ground, and do take the opportunity to connect with the ground underneath you. So here for me, I have the ground of the Castle Cafe underneath me. I have Sarah O'Hay, who's close to me here, but we're distanced. So what's under your ground? Like, so, you know, connecting with your feet. So you'll have thoughts, you'll have something going on in your body, and very likely you probably have some sort of emotion. So that's the affective sense. So what are you kind of, you know, emotionally feeling? Now that's something I find quite hard to access, because I'm usually quite in my head. But that's what that's what happens. So we don't just have one aspect to experience, it's multidimensional. We have a couple of different things going on. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to do a short exercise around that, because most of the time, usually what happens is one of those aspects over dominates. It just takes over. So it could be just, for example, excessive worry. So you just feel like you're constantly in your head. You've no idea what's going on in your body. and all you know is that you're really worried and the thoughts are racing. Somebody else might have a physical condition. So they might have a backache that's just driving them crazy, and that's all they're thinking about is that backache. So, you know, that's dominating their experience. Or somebody else might have broken up with somebody and they're heartbroken, and it's that heartbreak that's taking over. So usually that's what happens when things get difficult. One aspect of our experience can kind of take over. And by learning something very simple like mindfulness and just being aware that there's more than just one part of us, it's really, really effective. It's really simplistic, and it can actually help your experience to loosen its intensity a bit and just to dilute a bit. And it's a little bit easier to deal with it then. So what we'll do now is we'll do a very short and a very practical mindfulness exercise. So I'll invite you just to close your eyes if you wish. So it's an invite. So it's not an instruction, and that's an important one. Language is very important. So I'll invite you just to close over your eyes. Give your eyelids a bit of a rest. They work very hard every day. We don't give them enough credit. So close over your eyes. Now, as I said earlier, feel your feet on the ground if you can. Maybe press the soles of your feet into the ground, just create a bit of a healthy resistance there. Maybe squeeze your hands. Your hands have lots of tactile receptors in them. It's a very fast way of accessing your body. And your tactile system, your touch system, is the fastest way to calm down your nervous system. So by giving yourself a hug or just kind of pressing your skin, it's one of the fastest ways of doing it. And just remember that, because when we have acute anxiety and stress and guilt and everything going on, it's our nervous system that's, you know, out of sync. So anything at all that we can do to physically support that, as I said earlier, the Tibetan singing bowl relaxes the brain, but the sense of touch as well, but anybody can do that, just touching yourself, the tactile sense. So connecting with your body. So we've connected with our bodies now. You know, we're feeling our feet in the ground. Start to notice your breathing again. So pay attention to your breath. Can you feel anything else in your body? So we focus on the feet, we focus on the hands. Is there anything else going on for you? I know I have a bit of sensation in the bottom of my spine. So just noticing it. So not worrying about it, just notice. We call this like noticing and naming. Is there anything going on for you in terms of your emotions? So do you have any emotional sort of resonance right now? Are you feeling anything effectively? And if you're not, that's absolutely fine. So all we're doing now is we've just dropped into the present, and we're just naming what's going on in our experience. We're just teaching the brain that there's more than one thing going on. What's happening in my thoughts? What types of thoughts am I having? I'm not worrying about them. So just naming the thoughts, okay? So, and as we know, the brain's favorite place to hang out is the past or the future. It's hardly ever in the present. What's going on in my body and what's going on in my feelings. Maybe just rub your hands together and open your eyes when you can. That's a really, really simple mindfulness exercise. I would say that was maybe 1 or 2 minutes long. It can feel a lot longer. We're not used to it. But notice how you are now. Do you feel a bit more present? Hopefully you do. And maybe you don't. But again, this is not about judging that. And we're talking as well about the barriers, and we've mentioned these already. So, you know, we have a lot of barriers at the moment in terms of being in the present. You know, there's a lot of expectation there. There's a lot of pressure. There's constant uncertainty. There's the guilt of people we've had to leave go. You know, we're working more than ever to hang on to the business. I'm less time with my children, even though we're all at home. You know, what's going on? This type of thing. So there are a lot of barriers, but it's just about being as present as we can for as long as we can. And that can really, really be very, very helpful. And it's very different for me now as well as a consultant, because I'm brought into companies usually to fix the problem and to have all the answers. And actually at the moment as a consultant, I can't really fix much. But what I can do at a very basic level is be present to my clients. This is so powerful. This actually works very, very well. Just being there with them physically or online in whatever way works, and really listening to them and really witnessing their experience and not jumping in with all my fantastic solutions, because guess what? I don't have them at the moment. And actually the quality of those conversations are a lot better. And that's the feedback I'm getting. So the more we do this, the more we tap into our own core in terms of how we really are, the more, as I said earlier, we activate our own intuitive wisdom, our own ability to know what's best for us, as John Kabat-Zinn says, you know, that we can, and Dan Siegel as well from UCLA has done a lot of research on this. And essentially we're better in the world. We're better at identifying, you know, what supports us the best and what doesn't support us. And that's critical to know as well. What I'll do again now is I'll just hand you back over to Sarah, and she's going to talk very practically again, just in terms of her own supports and what she's put in place in her own life.
Great. So thank you, Avril. So yeah, so just to continue the story then, in 2014, I became a global leader in the same organization and worked to stand up a new global organization supporting the 65,000 employees. And we had to go through a lot more change. So, you know, I became kind of a change lead then because I was used to being in that changing place. So we stood up an organization, we let people go, we changed that organization again, and we had to kind of recruit and change again. So for 6 years, we changed that organization to get it right, to make sure it was offering value 3 times. So that brought us up to 2020. And at that point, I was kind of done. And I was very tired and I was very stressed. And I noticed, to what Avril's saying, that notion of noticing, I noticed that I was stressed all the time, that that was my default mode. And I kind of knew that wasn't great. So I took advantage of a restructuring program and I was able to leave the business in February of this year, thinking that I would spend a few months kind of getting my head together, shifting gears for a little while, and then go back to work. And then COVID hit and homeschooling was needed and minding parents was needed, and the world changed, as we all know. So now I'm an unemployed person dealing with the anxiety of, you know, will I ever get a job again? And were my past glories as great as I thought they were? And all that, you know, catastrophizing. But I am actually grateful for this time because what it's allowed me to do is really attend to my own needs and really pay attention to why was I always stressed and what was driving that, kind of connecting to Avril's telling us about our prior story and how that feeds into our current experience. So I took the time to start seeing a therapist and talk about, you know, I'm not working right now. And even though I'm not working, I'm still stressed. I'm still going to bed absolutely exhausted at the end of the day, and I don't have a job. So what is that about? You know, what are my behaviors doing to me? And one of the things she pointed out was that I had spent so much time running and adrenaline, I had forgotten how to rest. I didn't see value in rest. In fact, rest wasn't really part of the deal at all. I was great at coming back to my breath periodically throughout the day. And I actually think that being able to do that allowed me to keep going for a long time. But at the same time, I wasn't resting. So the challenge from her to me was to, over a 6-week period, go away from the downstairs of the house to another room upstairs and just sit on a bed for 30 minutes each afternoon. And I wasn't working and I just had one child to mind and a dog. So how hard could it be? But over that 6-week challenge, I only was able to do that twice. So she set me another challenge, and this time I did it 7 times. And even though there were times where my skin was crawling because I didn't want to sit at that bed, I did it. But over time, and all of these things are practice, you know, the more you practice these actions, the more value you get. I realized that rest is incredibly important. And it allows you come back to your present so much more easily if you're actually not tired and you're not exhausted. Okay. And when you think about it, if you think about a top athlete or somebody performing at a really high level, you know, so I kind of think of a tennis player, Serena Williams, or, you know, a football player, Peter Crouch. These people perform at a really high level over sustained periods of time. So they will always have rest in their schedule, locked in, confirmed time. In fact, if you said to a top athlete that you never rested, that you only slept so many hours at night, that you worked 14 hours a day, that you were never off your phone, they think you're absolutely out of your minds. Because in order to really perform really well, to have focus, to be able to think through, you know, mistakes, to be able to have other ideas, to keep that level of performance, you have to have rest in your schedule. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is it's something I've really learned only recently, and the power it has to help me get back to my breath, come back to the present, be available to myself right now, which allows me to be available to my family, available to potential job opportunities, spot the opportunity when they come rather than being either exhausted or worst case scenarioing in my brain so I don't see the opportunity and my thinking has constricted. It allows me, you know, it allows me to expand my thinking. So just to share as well, a book that I have got great value on is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. Some of you may know who she is. She's a researcher in shame and vulnerability, and she's become a huge guru in leadership and in just being a human being. And one of the pieces she talks about is rest, how in the Western world, we have made stress and exhaustion nearly status symbols. And actually allowing ourselves to rest, come back to who we are, spend more time playing, spend more time creating, spend more time not working or not doing, actually makes us better. And what I found, even though I'm still a doer and I have a big sequence of things I like to achieve every week, I'm now doing that and I'm bringing rest into it and coming back to the present. And actually, what I found, I still get everything I need done, but I'm not exhausted. I'm not cranking. I'm not biting everybody's heads off. I feel at ease in myself. So coming back to the present, letting go of the negative thoughts, being more available to yourself, anchoring yourself in your breath from a place of rest is so helpful. And it's really helping me now deal with the anxiety of looking for work and with the anxiety of COVID. So I just wanted to share that with you today, and I think it might be of some benefit. Um, so I'm just checking my notes. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, yes, back to that point about practicing, that you have to kind of practice rest and you have to practice mindfulness because they're habits. And it's about forming habits that are supporting you, not harming you. So that's just what I wanted to share. So thanks, Avril.
Sarah, thank you very much for that. And you know, you mentioned earlier that, you know, like when you do rest, you operate much better, you get through your day in a much better way. And I've often said, like, if I had funding for research, I'd love to do the research on the link between tiredness and our executive functioning. Like, our executive functioning is how we basically get through our day. And I know myself, my worst moments in my day are usually when I'm tired. It's when I'm biting the head off my children, etc., etc. And as Dan Siegel, the psychologist, tells us from UCLA, in relationships, we're either doing one of three R's. We're either relating, so R for relate, R for rupture, or R for repair. So spend more time and relate if you can. And to do that, it's about being present. And I know this myself, because if I'm not, I lose a connection with myself, I'll snap the head off somebody, and then I'm spending hours later trying to fix that problem. And that's not good for anyone. So as we said today, it's very much about just staying in the present as much as you can and accessing that intuitive sense that you have, that you know what's good for you and who's good for you and what isn't good for you and who isn't good for you. And it's absolutely fine as an adult to be aware of that. And Linda Graham, who's written the book Bouncing Back, she talks about, it's about resilience. So it's literally bouncing back. And she talks about drawing out your circle of support. So who's in your circle, and just writing their names. And that by even doing that, that you activate those brain regions that say, yeah, you're not on your own. You know, even though you're a leader and you've operated a lot on your own in your life to get where you've come to, or you're a business owner, you're not on your own, and you do have a support network. And it's very much, you know, it's Sesame Street simple, as I said already. It's back to basics. It's back to being there for yourself and really relating to people at a real human level. And we are losing a lot of that through technology. And it's great to connect on Zoom. It's a great platform. But things like our mobile phones, etc., they can be, you know, they can be barriers too. Of course, they can be fantastic enablers as well, but sometimes they're not the best for us. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, you know, in the West, again, that we've put such a value on being stressed and such a value on action orientation and doing. And we've been told time and time again that we should be called human doings as opposed to human beings. And I know myself, as I mentioned earlier, the reason why I'm so interested in trying to stay in the now, and I do mean it, trying to stay in the now, because it's not easy for me either, is because I'm addicted to doing. I love getting things done, and that sense of it's done, but it's never enough. It's never fully satisfied. You'll never get there. And it's a misnomer in our brain, in our thinking, when we think, oh yeah, when that's done, but sure, all we do is we go on to the next thing. And as Sarah said earlier, you know, it is very helpful just to try to let things go. So mindfulness is about, as I said, just very simply noticing and naming your experience. And when you can, leaving it go. Like there's a lot of talk out there about changing your thoughts, about changing your experience, etc. But that actually just puts in extra pressure. And we know very, very simplistically, if you can just name what's happening for you and let go of the parts you can let go of without being under pressure to fix it all, that's generally much more helpful in our experience in terms of, you know, how you can get through your day. And then as a result, how everybody around you can get through your day, and that you're not spending your time in rupture or repair, you know, as can happen to all of us. So as I mentioned earlier, John Kabat-Zinn is very much the person who brought mindfulness into the West. From a more local perspective, in terms of the UK, Professor Mark Williams leads the mindfulness studies and research team at the University of Oxford. I have the link here for his stuff. His books are here on the screen as well. He's written 2 very simple, very accessible books on mindfulness as a very practical exercise. And all of his meditations are free on YouTube. They're excellent. You can get one that's a 3-minute breathing space. I think he might even have a 1-minute one. And even more local again, my own mindfulness teacher, who I was told to go to all those years ago, is Catherine Sutton. She has done a huge amount of mindfulness teaching in the south of Ireland. She lives in Lismore. That's the website, her link for her online website. And just in terms of the whole area of habits, and as Sarah said about setting up good habits, because we are so focused on, oh, these are the habits I need to get rid of. But Dr. Judson Brewer talks about the power of setting up a new habit, and you can set up new habits. And he's absolutely the world leader at the moment in addiction studies, and how mindfulness can help addiction, and how it can help, you know, at an excessive level addiction, but at a more mild level, you know, unhelpful habits. And that's the link for his book, The Craving Mind. And I'd certainly highly recommend that from that perspective. Today's session is very much, as I keep saying, very anchored in very simplistic wisdom, but as simple as it is, it does absolutely work. As I said, as Sarah said earlier, I was brought in to work with MSD a number of years ago for a super duper consultancy practice who'd worked with the IRFU, Leinster Rugby, the Johnny Sextons, everyone of the world. And I thought, wow, I'm going to get the real, you know, the real answer to the, you know, the Willy Wonka recipe now to life. And the more I worked with the guys, the more it was back to basics. Absolute bread and butter, staying in the moment, minding yourself, this kind of thing, really, really simple, to the point that at the start I was like, I want my money back. It can't be this simple, but it absolutely is. And it's about giving yourself a chance around that as well. And as I said earlier, my own business is called Human Reasons. I did actually rebrand to that the week of the lockdown. I've been planning it for months before that. I was receiving mentoring support to the local enterprise board and to somebody called Jackie Gowran, who's been fantastic to work with from Business Weaving. So that was all the week of the lockdown. So you can imagine the timing there. But Human Reasons instead of Human Resources, and there's a real reason around that. And as I said earlier as well, there is we are offering, we're delighted to offer a discount for our coaching services to any of the members of the institution as well. Just before we finish today, I have actually gotten some private questions through the chat. There haven't been any other questions. I'll ask there in a second if anybody does have one, but I have actually responded to a number of questions through the chat already. But I'll just put it out there. If anybody has a final question that they'd like to ask, you know, in our last minute or two, you're very welcome to ask that. And again, I'd like to thank Niamh O'Malley in terms of today. I'd like to thank Market Lane Restaurant Group and their Castle Cafe here in Blackrock, my co-contributor, Sarah O'Hay, and also obviously everybody who's come along today. Today has been recorded as well, and it will be available as a resource for you. If anybody would like to get in touch, you know, my website is humanreasons.com. You know, today's content, you might think about it, you might have questions, you might have concerns, whatever it might be. We're always, you know, happy to hear from people as well. So I'd like to thank you for coming along today. I'd like to give you an invitation to maybe take another minute before you rush on to the next thing. And I can already feel my system going, right, I need to check my phone, I need to see what's going on and all the rest of it. But maybe give yourself that minute and try and practice what we mentioned today. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Sarah, also.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.